Welcome back to Math in the Bubble with your host, Mr. Daly. I'm going to skip that season 2 stuff. I think it's just going to be confusing. So, last episode was technically our 6th live stream. So, today is our 7th. Even though there might be a few missing videos from YouTube. Yep, it's the #1 TV series right now, trending on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell notification. Okay, without further ado, we're going to get straight into it today. No multi-grid. Percentages. It's a new... yeah, percentages. Basically, there's a lot of division going on in percentages. So, just to start off, percentages basically means out of 100. So, 100% is 100 out of 100. And you can think of out of, another way of saying out of is per. So, in the same way you got 60 kilometers per hour. That's another form of division. Out of, per, and division, divided by, are all part of this division family. So percent out of 100. 100 cents in a dollar, you can remember that. So percentages out of 100. Okay. Now percentages, fractions, decimals and fractions are basically all the same numbers, but different ways of writing them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple of percentages and transfer them into decimals and fractions. I'll show you how you do that. So number 1 is going to go with number 1 and number 1. Number 2 is going to go with number 2 and number 2. And then we'll start with decimals and go to percentages and fractions. And then we'll start with fractions and go to percentages or decimals. And then by the end of that, you should have a good idea as to how to convert between all three. Fractions being the hardest, but once you sort of understand them as being division, they're not too hard. Okay, with going percentages to decimals is probably the easiest thing to do, because basically you're just moving the decimal point 2 times. So the decimal point is here, and if we move it twice over, we get 0.23 for number 1, and for number 2 we would get 0.67. Okay, now if we take these percentages and we took them into fraction form, out of 100 is another way of writing that. 23%, 23 out of 100. 23 out of 100. So like the division means out of. 23 out of 100 is what 23% is as a fraction. So 67% is 67 out of 100. If you got 67% on a test, and the test was out of 100, you got 67 marks altogether. Of course, some fractions can be simplified, but not these two, because we're dealing with a prime number. So whenever there's a prime number involved in your fraction in any way, then it's very unlikely that it's going to be reduced. But then we get fractions that look like this, which is probably the hardest thing to convert back to decimals and percentages, but we'll get there. Alright, so now we are going to move on to number 3. So we're going to take this decimal and put it into a percentage. So 0.02, if we're going back to percentages, basically we want to multiply. If you wanted to do it on your calculator, you can always multiply by 100. That's right, whoever said that. So you get 20. So you can think of moving this decimal point. You can move it here once, but you need to create another 0 to move it again. So it would end up there. So we get 20%. With 0.05, it's not 50%, we've moved it twice. Now it's here. So we have 5%. Alright. Now, if we take this 20% and we make it into a fraction, that's 20 out of 100. Yeah, that's correct, Josh. You have to think about where the decimal point is. So generally, percentages look like a big number, and then their equivalent decimal is usually got a 0 out the front. Sometimes it's got an extra 0 if it's a very small percent, like 5%. I just don't want to get confused. I made a mistake there. Don't take that as the decimal point. And also for this one. Alright, so with 20 out of 100, actually 20 and 100 can be divided by 20. So 20 divided by 20 is 1, and 100 divided by 20 is 5. So actually, if you got a mark in a test 20 out of 100, then you have essentially got 1/5 of the test right. So that's what's called an equivalent fraction. Right, so number 4 is 5 out of 100. Now both 5 and 100 can be divided by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. So 5 out of 100 in your test would mean that you got 1/20th of the test correct, or 5% of the test, or 0.05 as a decimal. Okay, let's move on to a quarter. Now, a quarter is it's one of those things that you need to know. There's a few fractions that you should just know how to get to a percentage. So a quarter of 100%, so think about what is a quarter of 100%. Well, that's 25%. And 25% as a decimal will be 0.25. So a fifth is an important thing to remember. That's 20%, because that evenly divides into 100. So if you also have, I'll do number 7 as 2/5. 2/5 would be 40%, or 0.40. The 0 isn't actually needed in the decimal, but you can put it in. It doesn't change anything. Alright, so another way to think of this, if we multiplied 4 by 25, then we get 100. So if we multiply 1 by 25, we get 25 on the top, and 4 times 25 is 100. So now it's easier to visualize these two as being 25%. Alright, 5/6 is more complicated, because it's not going to actually work out as a nice round number. So I might just make a little box here. Now 5/6, you can actually think of this as division. So this is the same as 5 divided by 6. So what we want to do, if we wanted to do it by, well, on a calculator, oh, you can't see it. Thank you. So 5/6 is 5 divided by 6. So you can put that into your calculator and you'll get what you have. So that's, see that how it is the same as 5/6 as a fraction. So if you go press this F to D button, I think it might be S to D in some calculators, that'll put it into a decimal. And so, see how it's a continuous decimal? So to write that, we would put 833 3, but technically you only need to put 83 and then a little dot above. The dot means that the decimal is recurring. It goes on forever and ever. Just because it goes 10 times on the calculator doesn't mean it doesn't continuously do that. So if you were to think of how we would get that number just by hand, then we can just use our bus stop. So if we have 5, we'll put a few zeros in there so that we can see how far it goes. 6 goes into 5, it doesn't go. So we take that 5 and we remainder 5 and we bring it over. 6 goes into 50 8 times. So 6 times 8 is 48. So we have 2 remainder. 6 times 3 is 18. So we have another 2 remainder. And now you can see that, oh well, this pattern is going to continuously, we're going to continuously have 2 remainder and 3 going in. So you get this recurring decimal. So once you have it as a decimal, it's as simple as moving it, the decimal point 2 times, and you will have your percentage. So our percentage is 83.3, well, 333%, or you could have just written 83 with it. Can you write a remainder 2? You could. Maybe at this stage. I want you guys to get into this recurring idea. If you think about this remainder 2, then it's actually remainder 2 divided by 6, which is a third. So I want to get you guys away from using remainders. But yeah, it's a good thing to think about. Either or. Right. Let's go through and write some methods. So for number 1, we were doing percentages into decimal. So just move decimal. I'm not going to have enough room here actually. Point twice. Might just, so percentage to fraction, you just make out of 100, and then we've got decimal to percentage, move decimal point twice to the left. So the other way around is move the decimal point twice to the right. But yeah, it should be intuitive which way round to do it, because basically your decimal is going to be a very small looking number and your percentage is going to be a whole looking number. Alright, and then for decimals to fractions, we basically went via, so if you went from a decimal to a percentage, then you could go from that percentage to a fraction. So the last one I want you to have a rule for is fraction to decimal, because if you've got what it is as a decimal, then you can go to a percentage using one of the earlier rules quite easily. So fraction to a percentage to a decimal, make a division problem, and you can use your calculator for that. Alright, let's try some of these. Okay. Convert percentages to decimals and fractions. So 32% as a decimal, we would move the decimal point twice, so we get 0.32. Let's just do all of the decimals. 72%, 0.72, 95%, 0.95, 14%, 0.14. So these are all the same number, just put in a different form. Okay, so fractions are there's sometimes two steps with a fraction. So 32 out of 100. Now 32 and 100 can both be divided by 2. So this is also equivalent. 32 divided by 2 is 16, and 100 divided by 2 is 50. So divide by 2, divide by 2. You can always spot whether something will divide by 2 because both these numbers are even numbers. And of course you can do it again because both of these are even again. So if we divide 16 by 2, we get 8, and if we divide 50 by 2, we get 25. So this, and this are all the same number. So 8/25, if I put this into my calculator to go back to a decimal, 8 divided by 25, then we're gotten back to, yeah, well, you can actually, yeah, you can do it to 95. We'll get there, Josh. Yeah, so that's important to know with fractions. They can be reduced. So this is called equivalent fractions. They are the same. So if I put 16 divided by 50, that's also going to be 0.32. Alright, 72 would be 72 out of 100, which is also, sorry, sometimes when I'm a bit squished I do a diagonal fraction, but it essentially means the same thing as if I got it perfectly lined up. Sometimes you do that if you want to squeeze it into a line, and that's okay to do. Alright, so 72 and 100 both divide by 2, so we get 50 out of 72 divided by 2 is 36, and of course we can divide by 2 again. 18 out of 25, and then once again 25 is an even number and can only be divided by 5, so we can't go any further there. But if there was a 20 and a 25 on the bottom, then we could divide by 5 instead of 2. And that will actually work with 95, because so 95 out of 100 is the same as 95%. 95, we can divide 95 by 5, and that'll be 19. So if we divide 95 by 5, some of you are already following along and doing it ahead of me, which is great. I can hear you in the air. And 100 divided by 5 is 20. So we get 19 twentieths for 95 out of 100. So if I put 19 divided by 20 into my calculator, you can see that it is 19 twentieths as a fraction, but it's also 0.95 as a decimal, and 100, if you multiply it by 100, we get back to the percentage. It is fun, Josh. A lot of people never get taught this connection between fractions and division, and because of that, I feel like fractions become the scary thing that's different, but really fractions are just division, and you can do that with your calculator, and percentages are basically just division as well. And between percentages and decimals, it's a very simple connection, because you've basically got the same digits, but you've just moved your decimal place. Alright, last one. 14% is the same as 14 out of 100. 14 and 100 are both even numbers, so we can divide the top by 2 is 7, and the bottom by 2 is 50. 7 is a prime number, so it doesn't divide by anything but 7, and 50 isn't going to divide by 7, so that's as far as our fraction gets. And also you can see that 7 divided by 50 is 0.14 as a decimal. Alright. Convert decimals to percentages and fractions. Okay, so 0.48 as a percentage, we're going to move our decimal point twice, and we get 48%. We move decimal point twice here, we're going to get 15%, 75%. This one is a bit different. We've got 3 decimal places. So just because there's 3 decimal places doesn't mean that there can't be a decimal point in your percentage. So if we move the decimal point twice, it's going to be between the 1 and the 2, the 2 and the 3. So our percentage equivalent is 12.3%. And you can see that if I put 1.123 in my calculator and then I multiply it by 100, then I get 12.3. So just because usually you'll see just percentages with no decimals in them, but there are occasions where there can be a decimal point inside your percentage if your decimal is longer than 2 decimal places. So same again with this next one. Our decimal point is going to line between the 4 and the 5. So we get 45.67%. Alright, now to make these percentages into fractions, we want to make them out of 100. So 48 out of 100 is our fraction. Both of these are even numbers, so we can make this 24 out of 50 and then make that 12 out of 25, and we've got to 25 again, and it's not going to reduce any further. 15% is 15 out of 100. 15 can only be divided by 5 and 3, but 100 can also be divided by 5. So we're going to divide by 5 this time. Divide by 5. I'm going to get 3/20. That's right. A thing to remember about hundreds is that they can only really be divided by 5s and 2s. They can't be divided by 7s, they can't be divided by 3s, without the decimal being recurring. 75%, we're going to get 75 out of 100, which is equivalent to, well, if we didn't know to go straight there, we're going to get 75 divided by 5 is 15/20, and actually 15 and 20 can be divided by 5 again. So 15 divided by 5 is 3, and 20 divided by 5 is 4. So 75% is 3/4, and that you could think of that back to when we had 25%. 25% is 1/4. 50% would be 2/4. Well, 2/4 is the same as a half, right? So 50% is 2/4 or a half, and 75% is 3/4. All right, last one. We have 12.3 as a fraction, as a decimal, as a percentage. So that's 12.3 out of 100. Now, this time we don't want that decimal point to be in our fraction. That's kind of a rule with fractions. You don't want decimal points to be in there. So to move that 1 over, we need to times by 10 on the top and bottom. So that'll move that decimal point out of the way, and we'll get 123 out of 1,000 for our fraction. So that's our best answer. And I think this number divides by 3, but 1,000 isn't going to divide by 3 evenly. Alright. Now, similarly for this one, we're going to get 45.67 over 100. So if we wanted to shift the decimal point along, we would multiply by 10, and we would get 456.7 out of 1,000. We want to move it over one more, so we're going to multiply by 10 again. 4,567, 10 thousandths. Yeah. That's that. So actually, I didn't have to do that twice. I could have just multiplied by 100. So really, that step I could have skipped by just multiplying by 100 on the top and bottom. Alright, last one, and then that'll be us. Convert fractions to percentage and decimals. So let's do the decimals first, because I just want to do this with a calculator, because oh, thank you for that is working really well. Thank you guys for stopping me before I went too far. All right. So 3/10. If we didn't know what this was, usually you can go straight there. You do enough of these, you start to figure out patterns. So 1/10 would be 0.1. So 2/10 would be 0.2. 3/10 is going to be 0.3 or 0.3. 0.3. So 1 divided by 10 is 0.1. 3 divided by 10 is 3/10, which is 0.3. As a percentage, well, we can put an extra 0 there so that we can move our decimal point twice, and we're going to end up there. So 3/10 is 30%. All right, 4/5. Well, we want to think what 1/5 is. 1/5, this is something you should know, is 0.2. So 2/5 is equal to 0.4. So we're just counting in 0.2s. So 4 times 0.2 is going to get us to 0.8. So you can think of that as the same as 1/5 times 4. So 1/5 is 0.2 times 4 gets us to 0.8. So it's handy to know what 1/5 is, what 1/4 is. 1/10 equals 0.1. 1/4 equals 0.25. 1/5 equals 0.2. 1/20 equals 0.05. These ones here, we're going to have to go to division. 2 divided by 7. Let's do this one old school. So if we are dividing into 2, 2 goes into 7, doesn't go. 7 goes into 20. 2 times 7 is 14. So 2 times, and then remainder 6. 7 goes into 60. 8 times. 7 times 8 is 56. So we've got 4 remainder. Ooh, that's a bit mess. How easy is that to see? It's not great, but I think you get the point. 7 goes into 40. 5 times remainder 5. Well, anyway, I might just put this into the calculator. So 2 divided by 7 equals 0.2857. Notice how anyway, this, I'm just going to keep going, guys. Thanks for all that helpful information. 28.5% is the same as that decimal. Yes, it goes for a little bit further, but we won't go any further. All right, 8/9. Ninths are actually a very interesting one, because 1/9 equals 0.1111 forever and ever. 2/9 is 22222. So 8/9 is actually 0.888 recurring. Well, actually you only need 1 dot. So 0.8 recurring. So as a percentage, we have 88.8 recurring. So it's just a good practice to go one decimal place if you got a recurring percentage.